She was no more than 7, curled up at the cemetery gate with nothing but a threadbare coat and a photograph clutched to her chest. The groundskeeper tried to shoo her away, but she didn't cry. She only whispered one name, and when a passing millionaire paused, looked closer at the picture she held, he fell to his knees, unable to breathe. If you've ever believed that one small moment can crack open everything we thought we knew, stay with this story. And if it moves you, share it, subscribe, or leave a thought. We read everyone. The night air cut through Boston like broken glass. Jack Cole stepped out of the Langham Hotel, the buzz of boardroom voices still echoing in his head. It was almost midnight, and Beacon Street was mostly deserted, the traffic thinning as the city surrendered to December's bite. He walked briskly, collar turned up, leather gloves buried in the pockets of his long wool coat. His black sedan was waiting at the corner, engine running, but he didn't head there. He took a left instead, the way he always did when he needed to walk something off. Riverdale Cemetery stood quiet against the city's hum. The iron gates, flanked by stone angels blackened by time, were closed for the night. But Jack had no reason to enter. It was the shape on the sidewalk that stopped him. A child, curled like a comma in a coat too thin, with knees to chest and arms crossed tightly around something clutched to her body. He hesitated, unsure if what he saw was real. But when he crouched down, the cold concrete biting through his slacks, he saw her breathe. Her cheeks were red from windburn, her lips slightly parted. She couldn't have been more than 5. Jack's voice broke the stillness. "Hey, are you all right?" Her eyes fluttered open, dark, steady. She didn't flinch, just looked at him like she already knew he'd show up. Then she held up the object in her hand. It was a photograph, faded, edges fraying. He took it gently, expecting a child's drawing, maybe a picture of her dog. But when his eyes focused, the world tilted. Vanessa. In the photo, she was younger, maybe mid-30s, laughing with sunlight across her cheek. Her hand rested on her belly. And beside her, barely visible, was a small silver frame, a mirror, a trick of light. But Jack had taken that photo. He remembered the exact moment, before the board meetings, before the money, before he told her to leave. His hand dropped. The photo landed on the pavement. Jack staggered back, nearly slipping on ice. The little girl sat up. "That's my mom," she said, her voice small but clear. She said, "If I ever got lost, I should find someone who looked like him." She pointed at Jack. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The shock was physical, sharp behind his ribs. He felt the blood drain from his face, the sidewalk swaying. "What's your name?" he asked. Finally, "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Cole." His knees buckled. The world folded. Jack Cole, billionaire CEO, architect of one of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in America, collapsed on a Boston sidewalk beside a 5-year-old girl holding the past he thought he had buried. She reached out to touch his hand, then pulled back. "You're cold," she said, like it mattered more than anything else. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look away. She just sat with him, silent under the weight of a name he had forgotten how to carry. The fluorescent lights of Massachusetts General Hospital made everything look too clean, too sharp, too awake. Jack lay in the narrow hospital bed, his body still in the same tailored clothes he'd worn to the board meeting the night before. His watch, a sleek German design, had stopped ticking somewhere around 12:14 a.m. the moment he hit the ground outside Riverdale Cemetery. The nurse had said he passed out from stress and dehydration. The attending physician muttered something about low blood pressure, maybe a panic attack. But none of those labels fit the ache Jack felt behind his ribs, like something had been torn loose after years of being frozen in place. His mind kept returning to her eyes, the child's, Lily. He wasn't supposed to feel anything. She was a stranger. But that voice, so soft, so direct, had a weight that shook him. He asked the nurse about the girl. The woman gave him a glance, one of those cautious looks medical staff develop over time, and said, "Boston PD brought her in. They transferred her to the Massachusetts Office of Child and Family Services this morning. She didn't say much, just her name. Lily Cole. That name. His name. Jack felt the room spin again. He sat up slowly, legs heavy with the pull of guilt. The nurse tried to stop him, but he waved her off. He needed out of there. He needed answers. Back at his home in Brookline, the house was colder than he remembered. High ceilings, glass staircases, curated art, none of it made noise anymore. The silence pressed in like fog. He walked through the main hallway and paused at the fireplace. The mantel used to hold framed photos, Vanessa in summer dresses, their short honeymoon in Santa Fe, a blurry Polaroid of the two of them on the floor of their first apartment. All gone now, packed away 5 years ago when he told himself it was time to move on. But he hadn't moved on. He had merely buried the truth beneath more success, more zeros, more controlled environments where nothing unpredictable could touch him. Now a girl had shown up at the edge of a graveyard, holding a picture that shouldn't exist, with eyes that looked too much like hers. And she had his last name. He sat in the study, lit only by the firelight. The photo haunted him, not just the image, but what it meant. A child, conceived before Vanessa walked away, or after. Had she tried to tell him, had he been too proud, too angry, too blind? His phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. He hesitated before opening it. If you care about the girl, don't go to the press. Just come to room 204, Chelsea House. Chelsea House. It wasn't the kind of place he'd ever set foot in. A rundown motel near Dorchester Avenue, mostly used for monthly rentals and last chances. The kind of place people ended up when the world stopped giving them better options. He read the message again, then stared into the fire. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he stood, went to the closet, and grabbed his coat. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, didn't take his driver. He just drove, hands stiff on the steering wheel, every red light stretching time like elastic. By the time he reached Chelsea House, the sun had started to sink behind a curtain of gray. Room 204 was upstairs. The carpet in the hallway smelled of bleach and cigarettes. When he knocked, there was no answer at first. Then the door opened a crack. A woman in her late 40s peered out. Short hair, tired eyes, cardigan too big. Her gaze held recognition, and not the warm kind. "Jack Cole," she said without surprise. "Do I know you?" he asked. "I'm Carol Rivera." She replied, "Vanessa's sister." He opened his mouth, but no words came. "You should come in," she said, "but don't expect comfort." And as the door shut behind him, Jack realized he had crossed into a version of his past he could no longer ignore. The walls of room 204 seemed to pulse with silence. Jack stepped in, the soles of his polished shoes tapping awkwardly against warped linoleum. Carol closed the door behind him and crossed her arms. She was shorter than Vanessa, with sharper features and a voice that carried more edge than warmth. Her eyes scanned him like she expected him to lie at any moment. He stood by the worn desk, where a motel lamp cast a dull yellow pool of light across papers, receipts, and a half-eaten sandwich. The place smelled of mildew and old air freshener, the kind that tried too hard to cover something that had been rotting too long. Carol didn't offer a seat. Jack didn't ask. "I assume you saw the girl," she said. "Lily." Jack nodded once. She was sleeping at the cemetery gate. Carol didn't flinch. She goes there sometimes. Thinks that's where her mom will come back. Jack looked down at the floor, then slowly raised his eyes. "I didn't know she existed. She knew that too." The words landed heavy. He wanted to argue, to ask how Vanessa could have kept a secret like that, but something in Carol's face stopped him. This wasn't a woman looking to accuse. This was someone exhausted by the weight of a story no one else had cared to carry. Carol pulled open a drawer and took out an envelope. It was creased at the corners. The edges softened, like it had been read and reread too many times. In the center, written in ink that had faded but not bled, were 6 words, "For Jack." "When he's ready." She handed it to him, but didn't let go right away. She wrote it after Lily turned 2. Carol said, "Vanessa was going to send it, then changed her mind. Said if you wanted to find them, you would." He took the envelope and held it like it might break. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked. Carol walked over to the window and opened the blinds a sliver. Outside, the neon sign of a pawn shop flickered against the night. "She told me once," she said, voice quiet, "that the day you kicked her out, she saw your eyes change. You didn't ask if she had somewhere to go, didn't ask if she was okay, just told her to leave. She figured if that was how you loved her, then Lily was better off not being second." Jack sat down. His legs gave out in that slow, stunned way grief does when it's too late to matter, but too early to move on. He stared at the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have. He didn't open it yet. "She's not in Boston?" he asked. "No," Carol said. "Last I heard, she was staying with a friend upstate. Then she stopped answering calls. Her phone's been dead for months. No activity on her accounts. I've checked the shelters. Nothing." Jack looked up. "You think something happened to her?" Carol shrugged, but her eyes turned away. "I think she's been running from something for a long time. And I think now, she might be too tired to keep running." They sat in silence for a beat. Carol stepped over to the door, hand on the knob. "If you're here to feel guilty, congratulations. You've got plenty to work with. But if you want to do something, start with Lily. She doesn't need a suit. She needs someone who won't vanish when it's inconvenient." She opened the door. Jack stood, the envelope still in his hand, unopened. "She has your stubbornness," Carol said as he passed. "But her hope, that's from Vanessa. Don't waste it." He walked out into the cold, the letter burning in his hand like a match he hadn't dared strike yet. Jack sat in the front seat of the black SUV, the engine humming softly and idle as the windows fogged from his breath. The envelope rested in his lap, the weight of it so out of place for its size. Rain tapped lightly on the windshield. He hadn't driven far, just around the block twice before pulling over. He hadn't planned to open it there, but the silence inside the car felt safer than his home or the motel room he'd just left. The paper inside was a single page, folded neatly. He opened it with hands that had handled billion-dollar contracts without trembling, but shook now under the pull of a woman's handwriting. "Jack, I don't need you to love me, not anymore. I need you to know that I forgave you long before Lily could ever ask who her father was. I didn't stay silent because of hate. I stayed silent because I didn't want her to grow up with someone who saw her as second to ambition. I wanted her to have peace, even if it meant having less. Maybe you'll read this one day. Maybe not. If you do know this, Lily is kind, curious, and brave. She carries things no child should have to, but she still sings in the morning and counts stars at night. She doesn't know what I gave up to keep her safe, and I pray she never has to. There's a place I went when I couldn't run anymore. I left the address below. Then I crossed it out. Because if you're reading this, it means you've already decided if you're coming for her or just for the truth. If you do go looking, don't go alone. They're still watching." Vanessa below the signature was a faint line that had once been an address, now slashed in thick black ink. But the shape of the letters and numbers beneath were still visible. A town name he didn't recognize immediately. Then it clicked. Syracuse. He sat back in his seat, staring through the windshield. Vanessa had hinted years ago that something inside Argenix wasn't clean. A research project buried under layers of subsidiary labs. She had seen something, said something, and Jack, caught in a merger, a storm of investor calls and board tension, had dismissed her concerns as emotional overreaction. He had told her to let it go. She hadn't. Jack rubbed his thumb over the ink where she'd crossed the address out. What had she found? Who had followed her, since his mind flashed to Lily sleeping on cold stone, holding onto a photograph like it was armor? He couldn't shake the look in Carol's eyes either. The fatigue, the fear stitched into the way she said, she might be too tired to keep running. He tapped the letter against his knee, thinking. He needed more than a heart. He needed facts, files, history. If Vanessa had been telling the truth, there were records somewhere. He picked up his phone and called Rachel, his longtime executive assistant. She picked up on the second ring, groggy. "It's late," she said. Are you all right? No, he answered, but I need your help. Quietly. She was silent. Then, what kind of help? I want every internal financial document from Argenix between 2019 and 2021. Anything with off-site clinical research budgets, third-party vendors, independent labs, everything. And Rachel, get me someone outside the company. Someone discreet, someone who doesn't ask questions. Another beat of silence. Okay, she said, her voice lower. I know a guy. He used to audit for nonprofits. Keeps things buried. You'll have it in 48 hours. He clicked off. The rain had picked up. He sat in the dim light, watching water slide down the glass in ribbons. For the first time in years, he didn't know what the next 12 hours would bring, but he knew what he wouldn't do. He wouldn't go back to pretending the past hadn't happened. He wouldn't let the woman who once trusted him disappear into another dead file. He wouldn't let Lily become a symbol of failure he couldn't name. His hands moved on their own, starting the ignition. She hadn't wanted him to come alone, so he wouldn't. But he also wouldn't wait. He eased into the street, heading toward the only person left who might still be watching the same shadows. The early December wind pressed against the windows of the Brookline estate as Jack watched the social worker's sedan pull away. Lily stood just inside the entryway, her shoes damp from the sidewalk, the sleeves of her coat swallowing her wrists. She held the stuffed bear tight against her chest, one ear matted, a seam at its neck starting to split. She didn't ask where she was, didn't ask who he was anymore, either. He had signed the paperwork less than an hour earlier at the Office of Child and Family Services. It had been clinical, forms, legal disclaimers, temporary custody, pending review. No one there questioned his name or his money. They only asked if his house had more than one bedroom, if he had access to a pediatrician, if he could provide consistency. They didn't ask if he had ever held a child before. Now he led Lily through the high-ceilinged hallway, his voice soft as he showed her the room prepared upstairs. The walls had been painted light yellow the day before. A new twin bed with a quilted blanket stood beside a shelf already filled with unopened toys. Too much, maybe too polished, like he'd tried to buy comfort in bulk. Lily didn't say a word. She sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching the bear. I'll be right down the hall, Jack said, gesturing vaguely. You can call me Jack if you want, or Mr. Cole. Or she looked up then, not blinking. Mom called you Jack. Only once. When she cried, the sentence hit with no warning. Jack opened his mouth, closed it again. He forced a smile. You must be tired. She nodded, but didn't lie down, just stayed there, upright, as if sleep wasn't a habit anymore. That night, Jack couldn't sleep either. He stayed in the library, half reading a book he'd picked at random, the fire cracking in the grate beside him. It was past midnight when he heard small feet on the wood floor. Lily stood at the doorway. No pajamas, no bear, just her. Can I ask you something, she said. Jack set the book down. Of course. She stepped closer. Why did Mom cry when she said your name? He felt it. Then the weight of 5 years condensed into one question. He could lie, say it was complicated, say her mother had been going through a hard time, but Lily wasn't looking for spin. He inhaled slowly. Because I said things I shouldn't have, because I hurt her. Lily's mouth pressed into a line. Then she climbed into the armchair across from him, folding her knees under her, too small for the upholstery to fit. I don't like when people yell, she whispered. Mom didn't yell often, but once she yelled at the door. Then she cried. Then we moved. Jack didn't respond, just sat there, the heat of the fire brushing the side of his face. I miss her, Lily said, eyes not meeting his. I do too. He answered. A few seconds passed before she moved. She got up, walked to his side, and touched his hand, not with intention, just placed her fingers there, then sat on the rug, leaning against his leg like a dog might, not asking for anything more. He stayed that way until she fell asleep. The next morning, Rachel called. I sent over the first batch of files. You'll want to see them. Jack nodded into the phone. I'll go through them tonight. There was a pause, and, Jack, this isn't like you. What she exhaled, taking a child in, running audits on your own company. I'm just saying, people will start asking questions. Jack looked down at Lily, curled up on the couch, still holding the bear like it had secrets. Let them ask, he said quietly. He didn't say what he was thinking. That the silence inside this house was beginning to sound different, less like emptiness, more like a waiting place. And something told him he wasn't the only one who had stopped pretending. The morning sun filtered in through the tall windows of Jack's home office, casting long beams across the hardwood floor. Lily sat cross-legged by the desk, her bear resting beside her, a picture book unopened in her lap. Jack had been on a call with Rachel about the audit report's phrases like unauthorized budget lines and ghost contracts, still ringing in his head when he noticed Lily stop mid-fidget, staring at the rug under the desk. Her small hands tugged at a corner of the heavy woven fabric. It folded back with effort, revealing a loose floorboard and a small wooden box tucked in the hollow space beneath. Jack's heart gave a flicker. He had forgotten about it, or rather, he had tried to. He hung up the phone without excusing himself. Lily looked up. It was hiding. Jack knelt beside her, brushing dust from the lid. The box wasn't locked. Inside were a few brittle sketches on yellowing paper, smudged graphite, and old memories that hadn't aged as gracefully. Lily pulled one out, holding it with the same care she'd given the photograph that first night. "That's you," she said, pointing to the tall figure in the drawing. "And that's Mommy." The drawing was crude, but unmistakable. Jack and Vanessa stood in front of a small white house, a vine-covered fence curling behind them, a hammock between two trees. The kind of scene they used to talk about in nights when money was tight, but dreams were abundant. Jack sat down slowly on the floor. He took the paper in both hands and let the lines take him back. He remembered the night Vanessa sketched it. The living room smelled of tomato soup and vanilla candles. They had laughed about something on TV. She had leaned into him and said, "One day, when we're out of this city, that's what I want." He remembered answering her with a non-committal hum, his mind already elsewhere thinking about capital rounds, about meetings that would keep him away late again. She had sensed it. She always did. A month later, she told him she wanted to leave Boston. She said she didn't recognize them anymore. He told her not to be dramatic. She said she needed space. He told her, coldly, "If you leave, don't come back." He had never asked where she went after now. Lily was staring at the sketch like it was a map to a forgotten country. Mom said this place made her smile even when it rained. Jack swallowed hard. She said that Lily nodded. She told me stories about it. Said the flowers smelled like sugar. Said you used to bring her tea in a chipped mug. He traced the outline of the small house in the picture. The proportions were off, but the memory was real. It had been a cabin rental in western Massachusetts. A long weekend escape when they could barely afford it. The name of the town. He had to search his memory. Hawthorne Ridge. He stood, the paper still in hand. Lily looked up at him. "Is it real?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "It was." She hesitated, then added, "Do you think she'd go there again?" Jack didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the frost hadn't yet melted from the lawn, but inside, something was thawing. He nodded. "Maybe that's where we should start looking." Lily smiled, not broadly, but in that quiet, tired way only children who've learned not to expect too much can smile. Jack folded the sketch and slid it into his breast pocket. Later that day, he called Rachel again. "Find me any real estate transactions or rental records linked to Hawthorne Ridge, anything from 4 to 5 years ago." She asked no questions. She didn't have to. And as Jack watched Lily that evening, curled on the couch drawing her own version of the house, he realized something subtle had shifted in the way she looked at him. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The first article appeared on a local blog, a grainy photo of Jack Cole stepping out of his black SUV, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls and a worn teddy bear. The headline was more insinuation than fact: Biotech Billionaire and the Mystery Child. By the next day, the story had reached the business section of the Boston Globe. Speculation bloomed like mold. Was she adopted? A love child? A PR stunt to humanize a corporate shark? Jack ignored the noise, or at least tried to. He deleted the alerts, declined interviews, and told Rachel to send a polite no comment to every request. Still, during that morning's Argenix board meeting, the tension hit the air like a storm front. Howard Preston, a board member with silver hair and a voice that never rose above controlled concern, leaned forward with his fingers steepled. Jack, with all due respect, this child, the press is drawing their own conclusions. Maybe it's best if you step back for a quarter or two. Let things settle. Jack didn't flinch. What should I tell them? Howard, that I took in a child who needed a home, and that somehow disqualifies me from leading a company I built from nothing. Howard offered a brittle smile. We're not questioning your character, just your focus. Jack closed his laptop with a click that echoed louder than his voice. You should start questioning the ethics of half the research contracts signed under your nose, because if I take a step back, that's what I'll be spending my time digging into. He left the room without waiting for a response. No one followed him. That night, he came home late. The house was dark, except for a hallway lamp left on in habit. Lily was asleep in her room, one arm draped over her bear, the drawing of the White House pinned to her wall with Scotch tape. On the dining table was a small envelope handwritten, addressed simply to Mr. Cole. It was an invitation. Jefferson Preschool cordially invites Lily Cole to our new Friends morning playtime this Friday at 9:30. He stared at it for a long moment, then flipped it over, saw a note scribbled on the back. We'd love to have her meet the others before the semester begins. Casual, warm, no pressure. He almost crumpled the card. What was the point? Show up and get polite stares. Watch parents pull their kids away. Let a little girl stand on the edges of a playground again, wondering why she always felt like a guest in someone else's life. But the next morning, he walked into Lily's room and sat beside her bed. She was already awake, watching the ceiling. There's something at school, he said. Want to go? She blinked at him. With the other kids. Yeah. Will you stay with me? If you want, Lily nodded. They went with no driver, no assistant, no security detail, just him and her, walking up the front steps of Jefferson Preschool like any other pair. The school was tucked between two row houses near Jamaica Plain, red bricked, 2 stories, hand-painted signs hanging in the windows. The principal, Mrs. Edith Langley, greeted them at the door. She was tall, lean, with silver hair in a bun, and a tailored navy skirt that spoke of decades managing both chaos and entitlement. She offered Jack a thin smile and gestured toward her office. Lily joined a group of kids in the play yard without hesitation. Within minutes, she was tracing sidewalk chalk letters with a boy in green overalls, neither of them saying much but comfortable enough in the silence. In the office, Mrs. Langley sat with her hands folded. Mr. Cole, we require documentation of legal guardianship before enrollment. I'm working with a lawyer. Jack replied, It's in process. But right now, she needs to be around children. She needs to feel 5 again. Mrs. Langley didn't interrupt. She just watched him with the kind of stillness that made people nervous. She's been through a lot, Jack added. I don't doubt it, the woman said finally. You're not the first parent or guardian I've met who's juggling more than just logistics. Jack didn't look away. Mrs. Langley stood and crossed to the window. Outside, Lily was laughing now, full, belly deep, at something the other boy had said. The bear was forgotten beside her. She doesn't smile like someone who's been shielded, the principal said. She smiles like someone who's survived something. Jack didn't speak. Mrs. Langley turned. I don't particularly like you, Mr. Cole. I think men with too much power rarely know how to hold it without hurting someone. But that little girl out there, she needs someone who stays. If you mean to stay, then we'll work with you. Until the papers come through. Jack nodded. It was the first real concession he'd been offered in weeks. Later, as they walked back to the car, Lily looked up at him. Can we come back here again? He paused, then answered softly. Yes, we can. And in her quiet way, Lily reached for his hand, not out of habit, but choice. The marble-floored ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Boston shimmered with light. Chandeliers bathed the space in soft gold, refracting through the hundreds of crystal flutes being passed between silk sleeves and cufflinks. Outside, reporters remained behind velvet ropes, snapping photos of the elite entering with polished grins and obligatory charm. But inside, the air was thick with curated elegance and unspoken calculations. Jack had hoped to slip in unnoticed, despite his name gracing the gold-lettered donor plaque by the entry. But nothing about the little girl beside him went unnoticed. Lily wore a white dress with lace sleeves, simple but luminous under the chandelier light. Her curls had been gently brushed back, and she clutched Jack's hand with quiet curiosity, her eyes wide as they wandered the vaulted ceiling and polished musicians setting bows to strings. He had introduced her as his niece when someone asked, "Just visiting family in town for the weekend." Most people nodded, smiled, and turned back to their champagne. But not everyone. Dr. Malcolm Renshaw, a retired pediatric specialist with a sharp memory and a blunter tongue, approached during the second course. "She's beautiful," the man said softly, standing beside Jack as Lily leaned against his side, stirring mashed potatoes she wasn't eating. Jack gave the practiced smile. "Thank you. She's family." Renshaw nodded, but didn't leave. "She reminds me of a nurse I met in Syracuse last year, Vanessa Rivera. Quiet woman, bright, had a calm way with the kids, always carried a notebook in her pocket." Jack froze. "She disappeared one day," Renshaw continued, tone still casual. "Said she was transferring, never left an address. The admin said she might have been followed, seemed nervous." Jack's fingers tightened around his wine glass. Then Lily tugged his sleeve. "I'm tired." Jack leaned down. "We'll go." He turned back to Renshaw. "Thank you, doctor." The older man just offered a measured look, then nodded once. Jack lifted Lily into his arms. Her head dropped onto his shoulder immediately, already half asleep. He stepped out of the ballroom and into the hallway, passing a wall of mirrors that caught their reflection, him in tailored black, her small in white, their images silent and slightly askew under the glittering lights. Outside, the driver was already waiting. He gave no instruction, just opened the door, climbed in, and pulled Lily closer to shield her from the night's chill. Back in Brookline, the house was quiet. Lily had fallen asleep in the car, her breathing steady, arms looped around his neck without knowing it. Jack carried her upstairs, laid her gently on the bed, and pulled the blanket over her shoulders. She murmured something about stars and fences, then went still. He closed her door behind him, descended the stairs, and opened his laptop. He typed slowly. Vanessa Rivera, plus medical clinic, plus Syracuse, NY. Several search results surfaced nonprofit health centers, part-time staff listings, scattered mentions on local news archives. One link stood out, a staff registry from a low-budget community clinic dated the year prior. He clicked. There she was, hair cropped shorter, eyes tired but unmistakable. The caption read, Vanessa Rivera, RN Community Health Services. Preferred not to disclose personal address. Resigned after on-site injury. No listed emergency contact. His heart thudded. There was a hospital record, 2 linked in a sidebar. A car accident. Minor concussion. Refused transfer. Left before formal discharge. He stared at the screen. What kind of fear makes a woman run so far she won't even list a next of kin? And what had she been running from? More importantly, who was still looking for her? Jack leaned back, one hand resting against his chin. He would need more than just memories and guesses now. He would need someone who could dig quietly, someone not afraid of what they might find. And as he picked up his phone to call a name he hadn't dialed in years, Lily's voice echoed faintly from upstairs, a dream-bound whisper. "Daddy." He didn't answer, but he knew what he had to do. The winter morning stretched across Syracuse with a stillness that felt too clean, too light for what Jack carried in his chest. The rental car hissed to a stop along Salina Street, its tires crackling over slush. Outside, the old brick building looked forgotten, peeling paint, fogged glass, rust lining the gutters. But this was where the records pointed. This was the last place Vanessa Rivera had signed her name. Inside. The waiting room was nearly empty. A few paperbacks curled on a chipped table, untouched. A cracked aquarium hummed in the corner, without any fish. Behind the reception counter sat an older woman with graying hair pulled into a bun. Her badge read, "Jenkins, RN." He stepped forward. His voice, though calm, barely made the distance. "I'm looking for someone. Vanessa Rivera." The nurse blinked, then slowly leaned forward. "You, her husband Jack," hesitated. "I was a long time ago." She looked him over carefully, then glanced at a photo pinned beside her monitor. "She volunteered here. Maybe 7, 8 months. Quiet but steady. She was good with the rough cases ones other nurses wouldn't touch. Never raised her voice. But one day, she didn't show up." Jack felt something tighten behind his ribs. Jenkins continued. "We thought maybe she got fed up. Happens." But then a call came from a hospital in Vermont. Car accident. Out near the border. No ID, just a blood-stained badge with her first name barely legible. Jack's throat went dry. "Is she alive?" The nurse nodded. Slowly. "Alive. Yes. But something changed. Brain trauma. She was disoriented when they found her. Couldn't remember her address. Didn't give a contact. She's been in a recovery facility near Burlington ever since." Jack stood still. He thought about turning back, about not letting the truth touch Lily. But he also knew there was no turning back now. 3 hours later, snow fell lightly as he parked in front of the Windrow Center for Cognitive Rehabilitation in Vermont. The facility sat quietly off a winding road, shrouded by pine trees and morning fog. It looked more like a lodge than a hospital. The receptionist at the front desk recognized the name before he finished saying it. "Room 23, she said gently. "She spends most mornings by the window. You can go in when you're ready." But he wasn't. Not yet. He walked the hallway slowly, as if memory might catch up and pull him back before he reached the room. Inside, the walls were painted with soft colors, greens, blues, gentle things meant to soothe. There were paintings, most of them abstract, and a community corkboard with clumsy watercolors pinned up. He reached room 23. The door was slightly ajar. He saw her profile before anything else. Vanessa was seated near the window, her hair cropped short and streaked with silver. She wore a pale cardigan, sleeves pushed up just enough to show the faint curve of an old scar on her forearm. Her gaze was fixed outside, on a squirrel skittering across the snow-dusted courtyard. Her hands rested in her lap, still, almost too still. Jack's breath caught. He hadn't seen her in 5 years, but some part of her hadn't changed how she sat, how her shoulders rounded gently when she was deep in thought. But there was no flicker of recognition in her eyes, no tilt of her head. She didn't know him. His fingers brushed the doorframe. Every instinct warred inside him to walk in, to walk away, to speak her name or bury it. Footsteps padded behind him. A young doctor in soft-soled shoes stopped beside him, lowering his voice. "You're Jack Cole, right?" Jack nodded without looking away. The doctor gave a slight smile. "She doesn't remember names, not even her own sometimes, but there's something I think you should know." Jack turned slowly. What the doctor gestured to a bulletin board inside the room. Pinned beside the window was a drawing charcoal, faint, done over and over on different paper. A man's face, always slightly altered, but always with the same eyes. "She draws that," the doctor said. "Same man, every week. She never explains it, just calls him the one who didn't say goodbye." Jack's hand fell to his side. The sound of his name lost meaning, and inside the room, Vanessa blinked once, then slowly turned her head, as if sensing something familiar in the silence just beyond the doorway. The room was quiet, except for the slow rhythm of the ceiling fan slicing through the still air. Jack sat beside Vanessa, his hands resting on his knees, his posture straight but not rigid. She didn't look at him, not with suspicion, not with fear, just a kind of distant stillness, like someone listening to music they half remembered. The doctor had explained it in clinical terms: partial retrograde amnesia, localized to declarative memory. She didn't remember names or conversations, but images. Images stayed, shapes, places, even feelings tied to them. It was like having the outline of a life, with none of the ink inside. Vanessa's fingers moved slowly across the table. A brush dipped into diluted paint. On the paper, a garden gate, faint shadows of a man standing alone, and always a cluster of wildflowers in his hand. Jack pointed to one. "Does she paint that often?" The doctor nodded. "Every week, almost the same. She's never said why, just calls him the one on the edge. Sometimes she adds a name." Jack's voice caught. "What name?" The doctor hesitated. "Jack, not often, but sometimes, in the early mornings, she'll whisper it, then forget by lunch." Jack's gaze dropped to the floor. That night, after she went to bed, he sat alone at the small writing desk in the corner. The chair creaked beneath him. He pulled a piece of stationery from the drawer and stared at the blank page. He didn't know where to start. Apologies felt too late. Justifications sounded hollow, so he wrote the only things that were true. "I don't know if you'll remember me. Maybe it's better if you don't. I wasn't good to you when I should have been. I chose ambition when I should have chosen home. And for 5 years, I've lived like someone chasing his own shadow. But you gave me Lily. You gave me a reason to come back." He folded the letter without rereading it and slipped it under the edge of her pillow. In the morning, she found it. She didn't say anything when she finished reading. She placed it carefully on the side table. She continued painting another version of the same scene, but the brush paused longer this time before each stroke. When Jack rose to leave, he moved slowly, afraid of disrupting the balance that had settled like fog between them. Vanessa looked up. "I used to like that name," she said softly. Her voice barely reached him. He turned. Her expression remained distant, unreadable, but her hand moved instinctively to her chest. Fingertips brushed over a silver chain, almost hidden beneath her collar. The pendant caught the light, a small heart-shaped locket, worn and dulled by time. Jack's breath held. He had given her that. 10 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday in March, the night they got caught in the subway with no umbrella and she laughed anyway. The chain had stayed, even when memory hadn't. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But her hand stayed there, resting gently against that spot, like it was enough to remember what the heart had once held. Snow had melted into the gutters outside the center in Burlington, and spring pressed softly against the windows, quiet, patient. Jack had made a routine of it now. Mornings in Boston with Lily, afternoons in Vermont with Vanessa. He never stayed too long, never spoke too much, just enough to not overwhelm the quiet she had built for herself. He brought watercolor paper, jazz records, photographs of old sidewalks in Manhattan, hoping maybe something would unlock a memory without forcing it. But most days passed in silence. Vanessa painted, mostly in blue and green tones, shapes without names, spaces without figures. Until one morning, Lily came with him. They sat on the floor of the activity room. Jack opened a children's book worn, the kind with fabric corners. He began to read, his voice slow and clear. Lily leaned on his shoulder, eyes fluttering with drowsiness. Her small hand rested on his arm. Vanessa entered and paused. She didn't speak, just walked over and sat beside them. Her hand reached toward the book, brushing a page corner as Jack turned it. She didn't read aloud, but her eyes followed every word. They sat like that for almost an hour. No one moved quickly. No one demanded anything. A few days later, as they sorted through paints, Vanessa asked softly, What do you do for work? Jack hesitated, then said, I used to think I was important, ran a company, spoke on panels, controlled people's schedules down to the second. Vanessa tilted her head. And now, he looked over at Lily, who had curled up with a small blanket in the reading nook, thumb in her mouth, breathing steady. Now, I just want to be someone she can call Dad without worrying if she's wrong. Vanessa didn't respond, but her hand moved closer to his, resting just beside it on the table, not touching, not quite, but close enough to feel the heat. As he stood to leave that afternoon, she reached for his wrist. Her grip was light, almost uncertain. I think I remember your voice, she whispered. Jack blinked. A pause. A knot in his chest loosened. That evening, he sat in his car for an hour before driving back. He didn't call anyone, didn't email his assistant. He just replayed that sentence in his mind, over and over, like a fragile song he didn't want to fade. In the days that followed, memories began to slip through. She mentioned a thunderstorm in New York, how he'd wrapped his coat around her as they ran through Central Park. She asked if he still made that awful tomato soup with too much garlic. She hummed a tune one afternoon, the same one they'd danced to at a wedding. Neither of them had really wanted to attend. They were fragments, disjointed, but real, and with every piece, something shifted in her eyes. The edges softened. Her voice, once hesitant, now held more weight. Then one afternoon, as they walked slowly through the garden behind the center, Vanessa stopped. If I don't remember everything, she said, not looking at him, if some parts never come back, would you still stay? Jack looked at her, at the way the wind moved through her hair, at the quiet worry behind her words. He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted her to feel the weight of what he meant when he finally spoke. But before he could speak, Vanessa turned toward him, eyes searching. The old house in Brookline no longer echoed. It breathed now slow, steady. Mornings smelled like pancakes and strawberry syrup. Evenings hummed with Lily's small feet running down the hallway, her voice bouncing off the walls, shouting after a ball or a made-up song. Vanessa, though still quiet, had begun to fill space again, not as the woman she once was, but as someone who had walked through fire and come out quieter, clearer. Jack didn't ask her to remember anymore. He didn't need her to. Memory had its place, but the present, this version of her who watched over Lily with a quiet smile, who hummed under her breath when washing dishes, who sometimes paused mid-thought as if catching shadows, this was enough. The decision to create the Rivera Health Fund came during one of those long afternoons when the rain blurred the windows and Lily had fallen asleep between them on the couch. Vanessa looked at him and said, simply, I want to build something that stays. So they did. The fund began with a modest goal to support mothers and children who had slipped through cracks, those without coverage, without support, without the luck Jack once took for granted. He brought the money, the team, the office in Chelsea. She brought the heart, and Lily, as if guided by some unseen instinct, drew a logo of a family under a rainbow 3 figures, joined hands, facing forward. Jack had it printed on every folder and letterhead without changing a thing. The grand opening was set for a Saturday. Light poured through the tall glass panels of the refurbished building in Chelsea. Jack wore a simple gray blazer. Vanessa, a soft green dress Lily had chosen. She still didn't like crowds, but she stood in front of the room nurses, volunteers, local officials, and read from a note card she'd rewritten a dozen times. I don't remember everything, she said, but I remember what it felt like to be alone. And I remember once believing that no one should be left that way. We built this to prove that belief still matters, that everyone, no matter how lost, deserves a second chance. Jack, from the back, watched her hand shake slightly, but her voice didn't, not once. After the applause, they moved outside. Balloons drifted. Children drew chalk hearts on the pavement. Jack stood talking to a city rep when he heard it, a soft gasp. A woman with worn clothes, a sun-scorched face, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she reached out to Lily, who was painting next to a table of volunteers. "She looks just like my daughter," the woman whispered, kneeling, just like her. Lily blinked up at her, then gently placed her small painted hand in the woman's rough one. Jack froze. Not from fear, but from the clarity of the moment. This trembling, unscripted connection was exactly what they had hoped for. Not headlines, not praise. Just one heart remembering it could still beat for someone else. Vanessa stood beside him now. She didn't speak, just placed her hand on his arm, not as a reminder of the past, but as an anchor for what they had become. Sunday came with the smell of cut grass and chalk dust. The Rivera Health Fund's small courtyard, usually quiet, buzzed with kids drawing under a canvas tent. Crayons rolled off tables, laughter spilled over the edges of folding chairs. Volunteers passed lemonade and paper cups, while a few parents, guarded but hopeful, watched from the side. Vanessa moved more freely now. She wore jeans and a white shirt, sleeves rolled, a clipboard in hand. Not for show. She actually used it checking names, asking questions, pausing every so often to glance around like she couldn't quite believe all this had her name on it. Jack stood further back, near the trees, letting her lead. He didn't speak much at these events, not because he lacked words, but because he knew when they weren't needed. Lily had planted herself in the middle of a group of girls with a box of crayons nearly as big as she was. Her curls bounced as she colored. She drew fast, without stopping, then suddenly picked up the paper and ran toward Vanessa. "Mom." "Look," she shouted. Vanessa turned. Lily thrust the drawing up like a prize. 3 stick figures stood in front of a crooked house, one tall, one with longer hair, one tiny in the middle. Above their heads, in shaky letters, "My mom and dad." Time didn't stop. But it slowed. Vanessa looked at the drawing. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her hand brushed lightly over the paper as if it might smudge the moment. "My friend asked who my dad was," Lily added, voice matter of fact. "I said, Jack. Is that okay?" "Mom." Jack had been walking up when she said it. He heard every word, but it wasn't the words that hit him. It was Vanessa's face. No fear, just a pause, like she was checking herself for a heartbeat. She knelt, wrapped her arms around Lily, held her for a second longer than usual, then whispered, so quietly only Lily could hear. "Yeah, sweetheart. That's okay." They didn't talk about it until later. The crowd had left. The chairs were stacked. The sun leaned low behind the roof. Vanessa sat behind her desk in the small back office, nursing a half-empty bottle of water. Jack leaned against the wall near the window, arms folded. "You don't have to agree to anything you're unsure of," he said, voice low. She didn't look at him right away, just rubbed her thumb over the label on the bottle. "I'm not unsure," she said. "Finally, I just don't want to give names to something still growing." Jack nodded, understanding more than she knew. Vanessa looked at the framed photo beside her, one Jack had placed there weeks ago, a picture from years before, when they'd still fit inside the version of themselves that wore smiles too easily. She placed her hand beside it on the desk, not touching, just anchoring. "I don't know when I started trusting you again," she said, "but I do. And I think Lily was right before I was outside." The wind knocked softly against the window pane. Jack stepped closer, something in his chest loosening, not from relief, but from the slow realization that healing didn't sound like forgiveness. It sounded like quiet, like a name spoken without flinching. Then the door creaked open. A young staffer stood there, face pale, holding a phone. "They just called a board meeting," he said quietly. "At Argenix, emergency session. They're voting to remove you." "Jack." Jack didn't blink, didn't flinch. The official reason, the staffer asked. Hesitant, unstable public image. Vanessa looked up then. Her eyes met Jack's, not with fear, but something steadier. The top floor of Argenix Tower had always felt sterile. Too much glass, too much white, and silence that echoed ambition. Jack had stood in this boardroom 100 times, but never like this. never walking in with the calm of someone who already knew what he was about to lose. 12 seats lined the long table. 10 were filled. Most of them were men in tailored suits, some younger, some older, all watching him with eyes sharpened by profit margins. Grayson spoke first. His voice didn't shake. He didn't need to raise it. He was the kind of man who made silence sound like power. "You've lost control," he said flatly. "This fund, this project you've attached your name to, it's not Argenic's strategy. We didn't build this to be a shelter. We built it to scale." Another voice chimed in from Jack's left. "Sarah Nguyen, head of legal. Public questions are mounting. Your association with a woman who's had cognitive trauma, and a child with no known background. It's exposure. It's instability." No one said the word liability, but it hung there, in the fluorescent light. Jack didn't interrupt. He waited. A third voice, Daniel from Acquisitions, slid the knife in quieter. "If you step down now, Jack, you can keep your shares. You've done enough. No one will remember this as failure." Jack leaned back slightly in his chair. His fingers tapped once on the table's edge, then stopped. "You're right," he said, voice even. "I did something Argenix wasn't built for. I trusted something that doesn't scale. I invested in a woman who lost her memory and a child who draws with broken crayons. I gave my name to a health fund that will never hit $1 million ROI. He stood. But I also woke up every morning and didn't hate the face in the mirror. For the first time in 10 years, no one spoke. Not yet. He looked down the table, eyes settling briefly on each of them. "Do you know what it's like to build a company with your name on every door and still feel like a stranger in your own office?" Grayson's tone chilled. "You're deflecting. This is about shareholder confidence." Jack stepped closer, slowly. "It's about character," he said. "And character doesn't show up on quarterly reports." Grayson crossed his arms. "So what are you saying?" "Jack, you walking away from all of it. You're choosing sentiment over structure." Jack didn't hesitate. "I'm not choosing anything. I'm building something else." And then quietly, deliberately, he reached into his coat pocket, took out the key card to his executive suite, the small brass key to the secure vault office, and the thumb drive containing 2 decades of executive protocols. He placed them all on the glass table. The sound was soft, but final. "I'm done," he said. Then he walked. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, like a man walking toward a different kind of future. Nobody stopped him, not even Grayson. Outside the boardroom, the city was still moving horns blaring on Tremont Street, a food cart closing early, light turning gold over Boston Harbor. Jack stepped into the elevator, hands in his coat pockets, downstairs. His car was waiting, but his mind was already somewhere else. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the 3rd branch of Rivera Health Fund wasn't flashy. No corporate banners, no press packages, just folding chairs on a front lawn in Providence, a banner made from construction paper, and the kind of joy money couldn't choreograph. Kids ran barefoot on the grass. Volunteers handed out juice boxes. Vanessa stood near the entrance, greeting guests in a soft blue cardigan Lily had chosen for her. Jack watched her from a few feet away. Not the Vanessa he once knew, but the one he had come to love all over again, quietly, through fragments and waiting. The day had been long, but Lily insisted on staying until the very end. She had a surprise. Near 3 p.m. A group of 5th graders from Lincoln Elementary arrived with something rolled up in a giant cardboard tube. They unrolled it slowly in front of the small crowd. A 2-meter-wide painting crayon, watercolor, markers sprawled with bold colors and crooked joy. In the center stood a man in a navy suit, holding the hand of a small girl with wild curls. Beside him, a woman in a yellow dress raised a sign above her head. In red, hand-painted letters, "Everyone deserves a second chance." The crowd clapped, some sniffled, but Vanessa didn't move. Not at first. Then her shoulders shook, and tears came without warning. She looked at the painting, then at Lily, then at Jack. And she cried. Not for memory regained, but for the truth she now lived. She walked to the center. The mic wasn't planned. but someone handed it to her. I don't remember every chapter of my life, she said, voice low but clear. But I know this one, this page, and I choose it. Then she turned, her hand light on Jack's back. Thank you, Jack, she said, for not giving up, for standing at the edge until I found the way back. He nodded. No words felt right, so he let silence hold the weight. Later that evening, under a pop-up tent near the parking lot, a local reporter pulled Jack aside. She was polite, professional, but didn't waste time. Mr. Cole, you walked away from Argenix at its peak. Do you think you've lost everything you built? Jack looked at her, thoughtful. I didn't lose a company, he said. I gained a life worth living. She blinked. No follow-up. Just a quiet thank you before walking off. He stood there a moment longer, letting her words settle behind him like dust on old blueprints. Back at the car, Lily had already climbed into the back seat. She was coloring, legs folded, sneakers kicked off. As Jack opened the door, she glanced up. Dad, he still wasn't used to the word, not out loud, not like that. Yeah. She tilted her head. Are you ever going to go back to being a boss? He paused. The car smelled like paper and apple juice, the kind of smell that came from living, not planning. No, he said gently. I don't need to be a boss. I just want to be part of your world. Then he reached back, ruffled her curls, and slid behind the wheel. The old Dorchester Public Library smelled of paper, wood polish, and a faint trace of lemon air freshener someone had sprayed just before the doors opened. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and today, it was full. The children's art exhibition, hosted by Rivera Fund, had started as a modest idea, a way to let the neighborhood kids speak through paint and pencil. But by mid-afternoon, the main hall buzzed with parents, teachers, and volunteers who had come not to critique, but to listen. Lily darted between easels and makeshift displays, clutching a tiny spiral notebook and a pen that clicked with every nervous habit. Which one's your favorite? She asked. Anyone who paused more than a second. We're voting. But it's not about winning. Vanessa sat near the back of the room, on a simple folding chair beside a table of lemonade and paper cups. She was thinner than before, but her face had color now. Lines of fatigue had softened into something gentler. Across from her sat an older woman in a beige cardigan, hands folded neatly on her lap. Bessie Jenkins, nurse, witness to an old life nearly lost, smiled with something that felt like quiet pride. You've come back full circle, Bessie said, voice low. Some people run from who they were. You found your way back without chasing the past. Vanessa nodded. I didn't think I would. I didn't even think I wanted to. Bessie chuckled. Funny thing about healing, it never shows up when you're looking for it, but it always knows the right door. A child tugged at Vanessa's sleeve. Miss Vanessa, where's Mr. Jack? Vanessa looked toward the far end of the room. Jack was near a window, adjusting a crooked painting of a dog with 3 legs and a golden crown. He wore an apron smudged with fingerprints and a safety pin clipped at the neck. A teacher had handed it to him earlier. He hadn't even taken it off. When he looked up, their eyes met. He smiled, not wide, not performative, just enough, just real. She raised a hand, barely, in reply. There was no speech, no bouquet, no grand finale. Instead, in the center of the room stood a small bronze statue, unlabeled by the children, but clearly the centerpiece. It showed a man kneeling to tie the shoelaces of a little girl. His head was bowed, one hand steadying her ankle. The girl looked forward, not down. Etched at the base were 4 words. For those who stayed. People lingered there. No one said much. And in that quiet, Lily came back with a worn hardcover book from the library's secondhand shelf. She'd found it earlier, tucked behind a collection of fairy tales. Inside was a folded envelope, yellowed, her name written in Vanessa's old handwriting. Lily held it out. This was inside. Vanessa took it slowly. Her fingers traced the edge, then stopped. She didn't open it. Instead, She reached for Lily and pulled her into her arms. You know what she whispered. I don't need to read it anymore. I'm living what it was trying to say. They stood that way for a moment, not as proof of healing, but as its quiet result. Outside, dusk started to fall. The windows glowed amber, and people began to gather their coats. Jack walked over, not to interrupt, but just to be near. They didn't speak at first. Then Vanessa looked up. We're not the same. Jack, not who we were. No, he said. But maybe that's the point. She tilted her head. And if we don't walk the same, we walk together, he said simply. That's enough. She didn't look back. But he knew. Something had changed. There's something about a child's drawing taped to a hallway wall that stays with you crooked, bright, unfiltered. It doesn't ask for attention. It just is. Like the kind of love that doesn't announce itself or demand to be understood, but waits, quietly, faithfully. Maybe that's what family becomes, not a mirror of what was lost, but a place to start again, no matter how late. And maybe the real courage isn't in remembering everything, but in choosing, even with the unknowns, to stay.